Kinesiology 223. Specifically, we're going into chapter 8 now, and this chapter speaks to diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is the first presentation out of 8 for this chapter. In this particular presentation, we'll be going over DEI culture and enculturation and acculturation. So like saying adduction versus abduction, they're very close in terms of how they sound, but they are vastly different. So let's go ahead and jump into this and get going. The main outcomes for this chapter, this is right from the book, describe why diversity, equity, and inclusion are important, define what they are and what is cultural competence, describe sport, exercise, setting research findings, and you're going to have some exposure to some of these research findings. I'm not going to hold you to them, and hold that over to a certain degree, but you will have to have some familiarity with those. And then you have to come up with a couple strategies as well. So as we go through this chapter, you'll end up fulfilling all of these. And the first part of this in the chapter, we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, and it's kind of a big hot button issue. And actually, we're looking at DEI as a bit of a ever-changing landscape, given that we have a president who has basically said he's going to dismantle the entire Department of Education, of which DEI initiatives are part of that, and funding comes from the Department of Education for DEI initiatives. So it's an interesting place to be in. I happen to be on a shared governance committee here on campus for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's actually really interesting. We have some really interesting conversations in our meetings. So first, let's look at diversity. Our college is set in an urban environment, and many of our students have already had experience as a result of their high school experiences, interacting with other students from any number of different affinity groups. Could be religious, could be social, could be geographic, could be any number of different things. But the concept of diversity is really the recognition that there are different groups. That's the first thing, to even just acknowledge that there are different groups, and that individuals, they make up the daily interactions that we have in our lives, and we're going to come across people from different groups on our campus and within our day-to-day activities. And I stress this because when you look at like a college environment, it's probably one of the more diverse environments you're ever going to see. And when you get into like college athletics, is a highly diverse environment in terms of an affinity group. So, the overarching strategy that promotes an engaging environment and fosters a culture of belonging and recognizes and addresses barriers to inclusion are kind of all the key buzzwords you'll hear and see when you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, whether it's in a work environment or a college environment. But I will say this, and I will offer this caveat, that you're even seeing diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives being ramped down in the corporate world, which is wild to see this, companies openly saying we're going to ramp down our DEI initiatives. So equity, oftentimes the term equity and equality are used interchangeably, but this would not be correct, although they are close. With equity, it works under the presumption, much like we see in diversity, we all are unique, we all have our individual strengths, but also our individual needs that we have. And there's a uniqueness that we have. And one of the best examples I've seen different, an example that relates to shoes, another one that relates to bikes, and I'm going to try to encapsulate that as best as possible. If our campus were to overnight grow by 4 times the size and all of our students needed to get around campus on a bike, equality would be same bikes for all, same color, same size, same 2 wheels, same bike for everyone. That would be equality across the board, wholesale. But equity would address the different and individual needs of each person. A person who's taller would receive a larger bike. A person who's shorter would receive a smaller bike. Somebody who perhaps has challenges with balance, they would receive a tricycle, right? And somebody who maybe has an issue where they're a paraplegic, they would then have a bike, not book, that would be an upper body style ergometer, where you do use an UBE, a UBE style bike. And, equality, when you look at it, it's kind of a one-size-fits-all concept, where equity attempts to provide, an equitable solution based upon the person's individual needs. Now let's take it to the next chat or next slide here. With inclusion, I often describe this as kind of like the actionable part of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this actionable part, as a leader or a coach, you have to take the steps and really have good self-awareness and, really strive to make those around you feel empowered. Whether it's a team of athletes or a team of accountants, a team environment provides a cultural opportunity, meaning you can create that culture any way you so choose, and you can make it whatever you wish. And culture can be cultivated to support that all opinions matter and all opinions have value. And because of the differences between all of us, it's actually those differences that help provide a more robust problem-solving methodology. But I have to say, you have to set the expectation on the front end that all opinions do matter and everybody's voice should be heard. Let me get myself out of the way here. Now, the book goes into a little bit more on diversity, equity, and inclusion. The way they define it is it's the presence for diversity, the presence of socially meaningful differences among members of a dyad, meaning two or more, or a group. Equity is the commitment to give everyone equal opportunity to succeed by providing resources and access to opportunities to do so. And inclusion, that's the degree to which people feel allowed or able to express their individuated or individual self and have a sense of connectedness and belonging to a particular group. Now, culture becomes a concept that's kind of broad-based and can work all the way down to granular. And I've said it kind of in loose translation here where, you can create a culture as a coach. You can create a culture as a manager. And, and think back to many of the people you've worked with, and I've asked you to do this, and you've been asked to write up about it or do a write-up about it. Think of some of the leaders that you've confronted and come across and what type of culture they've actually fostered within their organization. It's different, right? And you have these different groups, and within the environment of having these different groups, they have different characteristics and kind of like this proximity to others within the group. But, I want to talk a little bit about actually creating own culture. And I think that is of importance and of value, but I really want to focus a little bit of time on how the book defines culture. And it's just, it's beyond just a list of kind of characteristics of who people are and what they are, because the book also notes that there's a little bit of a component of power and privilege, and to a certain degree, there's bias involved with that as well, right? You look at like the different cultural characteristics of other people, and perhaps you might have just an internal bias regarding a particular person or some of their traits. And quite frankly, it might be wrong or improper, but it's just how your wiring is, and you have to work at overcoming it. For other people or other groups, it's not a problem. Now, the book tries to do a good job here in terms of enculturation. Is part of the socialization process where the person acquires the qualities to be a member of one's own group. And if I were to lay this out and kind of look at these side by side, because I thought the book kind of had a little bit of a challenge here in laying this out so it makes sense. But enculturation, the person acquires the skills and qualities needed to be a member of one's own group. And you look at that and you go, okay, that's one's own group, but acculturation or acculturation, it's an attitude or behavioral changes associated with living in cultures that differ from one's own. So here's a wonderful example. Like, I went to college and I had to basically become acclimated to the culture of the sports program I was involved with. I had a different sports program when I would play sports at Harper, and it was a little bit different in terms of culture when I went up to UW-Whitewater. My roommate when I was at UW-Whitewater, he was our quarterback, and he ended up playing football in Italy for the Bologna Doves, and he played there for I think 2 years. But he had to make some very marked and noticeable changes in how his lifestyle was and how he lived, because he was living in a totally different culture and it was different from his own. So I would argue that he went through more of an acculturation. And when you're part of like your own little group, in terms of I went and played football, I had enculturation. I had to become acclimated to the people in my group and some of the cultural norms that are part of being in that group. So I thought the book kind of did a poor job of describing and differentiating these two. So I hope that example helps you guys. And if you take it a step further, the process of learning and internalizing the cultural norms, values, and behaviors of one's own culture, that's something that typically occurs at childhood. It was something I had to do when I went to UW and I was part of a social group. Uh, Now, the other side of that is acculturation. Acculturation is a process of adapting to and adopting aspects of a different culture, often experienced when individuals come into contact with another culture. That was my former roommate. So with that, I'll let you guys kind of compare and contrast these back and forth. I won't belabor the point. But if I were to look at these two and look at the book examples versus these examples, I'd probably go with these. I sourced these externally just through a quick Google search and also through ChatGPT to help me compare and contrast these to kind of really frame this up a little bit better. So, you look at this and go, all right, how is it that you can actually work to help people? Because perhaps you'll end up being a coach and you'll have people that will come from other geographic areas of the country, or you might be a coach and you have people who are coming into your program, and as a result, you have to help them basically become acclimated to their surroundings and to your culture that you're creating within your own program. So I want you to take a moment and kind of think of this both from the athlete side, but also think of it from the coach side and think about what kind of culture it is that you would create. All right, guys, signing off, and I'm going to do